Well, I want to take you forward to your actual experience, visceral, personal experience of the failure of your intellectual argument in defense of the war in Iraq, your moral argument, because at the center of this book really is your confronting the choices that were placed before us, the removal of a really hideous tyrant, someone almost uniquely evil in that part of the world for a very long time, and the possibility that removing him could lead to something worse, that anarchy itself and chaos would be worse. So there you are. You know this in your head. You've made the decision intellectually beforehand that you supported this war to get rid of this evil because you've been in Iraq before, right? You knew
Oh,
you'd been there
I
under Saddam.
visited Iraq in the 1980s several times. And, it's easy to argue about tyranny and chaos. The great philosophers have done it for thousands of years. But to actually experience it and learn about it firsthand is life changing. Iraq was never an abstraction to me, it was always a real place with dusty streets that I knew Baghdad rather well, etc. And my trips to Baghdad in the 80s, I said to myself, what could be worse than this? Nothing could be worse than this. This is not Arab because it's much more oppressive than the fellow Ba'athist regime in Syria next door, which I also knew from reporting trips. The only thing I could compare Saddam to was Ceausescu's Romania, which I also knew.
Mm.
This was like
And
Stalin.
what distinguishes when you're on the streets, how do you figure this out? How do you sense that the tyranny of Saddam is greater than Assad?
Nobody smiles. Everyone looks down. On every vertical surface, there's a big picture of him, essentially. And the diplomats, when you go for off the record briefings at Western embassies, they say don't change any money on the black market. Don't do anything suspicious. Because if the regime gets it in their head that there's something wrong with you, there's nothing any of us could do about it. It was like the diplomats themselves were hostages to the regime as well. You didn't get those kind of lectures in Syria, or places. You got them in Iraq. And then, the Iran-Iraq war, which Saddam instigated, killed hundreds of thousands of soldiers on both sides. But even accepting the Iran-Iraq war, Saddam was guilty of killing hundreds of thousands of people. There was the Anfal campaign against Kurdish women and children. So I said to myself, what can be worse than this? And that's where I was wrong, because I went back to Iraq as an embedded journalist in Al Anbar and Fallujah in 2004, again in 2005, and I saw what was worse than that. And that was absolute chaos, which the US military could not control ultimately.
What is that chaos like day to day in a place like Fallujah? How do you best convey that to humans who have not ever known that level of anarchy?
Andrew, this is the ultimate question because the Greeks, remember, had the god Dionysus, who was the god of many things, but one of the things of chaos. And the Greeks feared him and celebrated him because the Greeks were too rational not to admit the irrationality on the other side of being rational. And see, journalists, intellectuals in the West, they go on and on about authoritarianism and dictatorship. Dictators are always in the news. So they think authoritarianism is the worst thing in the world because they've experienced it, if secondhand. Whereas chaos, very few of them have actually experienced. Foreign correspondents have experienced it in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Latin America. And I experienced it in Africa and Iraq and various places. Nobody is in control. Absolutely nobody is in control. I was interviewed by a German correspondent who was in Baghdad after Saddam fell, and he went with a massive crowd to the former foreign minister Tariq Aziz's house, and they looted it. And he said it was the most frightening thing he had ever experienced because they were smashing everything, breaking everything, crowds, just fights breaking out, and there was no police, no order anywhere to be seen. To travel in the countryside of certain African countries, and to be stopped by soldiers who were drunk, who had the safeties on their rifles off, and were demanding bribes to go forward because because the writ of the central government no longer extended beyond the capital city and its environs. That's much worse than an extreme order. And in 2005, when I went back to Iraq, to Mosul, and I asked people, I went door to door, and they all said that as bad as Saddam was, it wasn't as bad as this.